My name is Hannah, I'm 23 years old. I work primarily in lettings. I do a little bit of sort of the maintenance side, you know, some viewings here and there. But, you know, I have a good overall sort of perception of what happens there. Now, I know at the moment it's a really tricky time for tenants who are renting, whose agents are currently running a reduced service. Or if you are dealing with your landlord directly, you may have a landlord that is directly affected by any of the pandemic that's currently going on. So that can probably be quite tricky for you guys. Now, the main point of today's video is just talking a little bit about the maintenance when you're checking out, and things that you can do in order to be able to have a smooth checkout process. I know for a lot of tenants, personally having renting and being one of those people, you don't often know what it is that you need to do when you're out, things that you need to look out for, and you just, you know, when you're out, you sort of think, oh, is there anything in the flat that I haven't checked over properly? So I just want to go through some tips and tricks with you guys to let you know about some things that I have picked up over the last 2 years working in the industry, and things that I find helpful, being a renter who's a young person who now obviously has that knowledge to share. So I'm just going to take some water. So the general rule of thumb when you're doing a checkout is that you need to hand that property back in the same condition that it was given to you in. Now, for a lot of tenants, the main question is, what does that mean? So, for example, if you've had a freshly painted property when it was handed to you, the landlord or the agent, depending how long you've been there, doesn't expect it to come back in such a way that it would need to be repainted again. So it's all about focusing around, you know, fair wear and tear of the property, and generally just making sure that you leave it in such a way that it's ready for the next person, which I guess is pretty standard for anything, any kind of rental, whether it's a rental of, you know, back in the old days, a book, DVD, same with property. You want to give it back exactly how it was given to you. So of course this is dependent on how long that you've lived in your property. Now, fair wear and tear generally, I would say, is things that happen in the property while you're living there. So for example, if you have a carpet, if that's a little bit, you know, if it's got like marks on it from where you've been walking, that would be classed as fair wear and tear. You know, if there's like, you know, you get those little grey marks on the wall sometimes. I know I've got one behind me. That's actually more of a chip. But, you know, those kind of things, that's more considered fair wear and tear. Just a heads up, that hole there, I will be filling that in before I leave this place, as this is currently rented accommodation. So that's the general rule. However, when there are other things that are going on, and there might be, you know, things that you don't pick up on that when you leave, you could be charged for. So to start, best thing for you to do when you're checking out is just to utilize your sources. So for many people, they will have an AST, of course, which is your tenancy agreement. You will also have some kind of inventory check-in from when you first moved in, and you maybe, if you're in a managed property, have regular inspection reports. So all of these three documents are something that can really be utilised in terms of comparing what the condition of the property was when you first moved in. For your inspection report, anything that the agency may have highlighted for you. So if you've got, say, a skirting board where you've had some friends round and that's been broken, of course that would fall under your liability to change. So these three things, so just to go over that again, that will be your AST, which is your tenancy document. There may be some special clauses in there. I know, speaking from experience, that many things include hanging hooks on the walls for your pictures. I mean, again, you don't necessarily have to put hooks in your walls anymore, and if you have done, those will need to be filled in. So those will always have special clauses in, so that you are able to see, you know, if their landlord has any specific requirements for you. Generally speaking, like I previously, this is going to be things like hooks in walls, or anything that could leave permanent damage. It's generally of the understanding that needs to be made good. So your inspection report, this generally does highlight any maintenance issues throughout the property, and will also be able to make a note of things that maybe you have accidentally damaged while you're there. So that's really useful. And again, you're checking inventory, so you can use this to compare, what the state of your property was when you moved in, items that you're not sure, is this the landlord's, is it mine? I don't remember because I've lived here for 5 years. So those are things that you can check to make sure that when you leave the property, you're not going to be approached about them, and you're not going to worry too much about if that's going to come out of your deposit. So those are some really great things that you can check. More or less anyone has access to those. Speaking from experience, if you're with a very tech-based agency, you can access those online. If you don't have them, just reach out to your landlord or your managing agent, and just ask them. I would say that communication is key. If there is anything that you have damaged or broken in the process, just be upfront about it. Because at the end of the day, it's better for you to go to your agent and say, look, I've cracked the hob, this happened a year or so ago, haven't reported it yet, but how can we proceed to fix this? Otherwise, what you may do is move out and think that it won't go noted, in which case you will of course be charged for it. And when somebody has to go there specifically for one thing, that can often be a larger charge than what it would be to get sorted while you are living there. So another great thing is just to go around your property and just make a list of things that you can see. So maybe try and have a little look at the walls, look at, the kitchen especially, your bathroom, note anything down that has, had a bit of wear and tear. So I know some really common things from experience are your bathroom. So the mastic in your bathroom, that of course, if you don't make sure that is maintained properly, that will go black and go mouldy. So ideally what you want to do is just make sure all of these little bits are done. So mastic in your bathroom, sometimes around your kitchen sink, drains especially. Personally, I use drain and blocker once a month to make sure that drains are maintained. If you're living in a high popular place, lost my words there. Anyway, if you're living in a highly populated place, such as London, then you're going to likely be living in quite a big, a tower block of flats, or somewhere where, the drains are somewhat all interconnected. Now, this is quite a common thing that we tend to see. Drains aren't properly maintained, and so there is some kind of issue there. So maybe while you've got the time now, while you're at home, pop some drain and blocker down there. If you've got even 4 months before your tenancy ends, you can actually get, populated, thanks Anne. You can actually get some enzymes that you put down your drains now. That will discard of all the skin, hair, anything that could cause problems sort of in the future, or could be brought up as something that you guys have not maintained while you're there. Just another thing there is that any maintenance issues that you've had, for myself, I'll admit our toilet seat has been loose for about 5 months now of our tenancy, and I haven't yet reported it to my landlady, but I must remember to do so before I leave, because I don't want that to be something that it looks like I've broken. So that's perhaps just another thing that you can check for. So some more things that you can check that you don't tend to think about. So like hooks in walls and seeing those holes, that might be fairly straightforward. You might see those and think, oh yeah, I really need to fill those in. But some really common things that people don't see is, so your washing machine, where you put in your fabric conditioner, that can quite often gain quite a bit of mould, mildew in there if it isn't cleaned out regularly. So that is one thing to check. Again, while you've got the time, give that a clean. Fridges, make sure that those are all cleaned out, especially if you're booking your own cleaners. Now, of course, for a lot of agencies, they don't stipulate that you have to have a professional clean, although it is recommended, as a lot of agents will have a very comprehensive list of things that you will need to ensure is clean before you leave the property. Again, going back to, you need to hand over the property how it was handed to you. So if you are booking your own cleaners, make sure that you remind them to do things such as inside of the cupboards. Again, quite a popular thing that is seen. The cleaners will go around the surface of the apartment, but they don't tend to go into all the nooks and crannies, whereas when the new tenants move in, these are things that they will notice. So, you know, crumbs in your cupboards, in your fridge, defrost your freezer, make sure that that's all good. Again, skirting boards, the tops of doors, where they get dusty, you know, these are all things that any regular agency or even landlord would expect you to have done by the time that you've moved out. So again, going back to anything that you leave behind, items that you leave, refer to your check-in inventory. And have a little look on there at the items that were actually in the property. Ideally, you want to leave that as close to that as possible, unless you've been permissioned to get rid of anything. The reason for this is that, of course, it costs time for somebody to then go to that property and take those items out. And yes, thanks, Sam. And, you know, so when an agent or a landlord has to take time out of their day to go and fix those issues, this could actually be a higher cost than what it would cost you to, say, throw your bed sheets out, or, you know, there's a spare toaster that you had that you've left in the cupboard. Things like that are quite often things that get deducted from deposits. And yes, just like Anne has said in the comments below, make sure all your light bulbs are working. So a property, when it's handed to you, it should have all of your light bulbs working. I know that if that's not the case, then you will be reimbursed that money, usually, depending on your landlord or agent. Speaking from experience, that's something that's usually the status quo. Extraction fan light bulbs, extraction fan, you know, hoods, they get greasy, they need to be cleaned often. These kind of things, you know, make your cleaners aware, go around and check your property. Ideally, you want to do this for you, and just to make sure that the property is in its best possible condition. It might sound like it can be a bit tedious, but for you, you want to do this to make sure that everything is as stress-free as possible, and that you know categorically that you've done everything that you could, especially if you're going to be booking your own cleaners. Maybe ask your agency or your landlord for a list of things that they expect to be done. I know most agents will offer this up, but it's obviously great if you can just know categorically that you are doing everything that you can to ensure that that is stress-free for you. I know, having rented myself in London for the last sort of 3 to 4 years, every time I leave a property, I'm always thinking, is there something that I've forgotten? Is there something, you know, that I've left? Is there any marks that I've left? Like, have I done everything that I can to make sure that I'm not stressed? Needless to say, every time I am very stressed about it, but, you know, taking these steps can help eliminate some of that stress that takes hold of you when you're checking out. Let's see, so if you do have any questions about any general maintenance, feel free to pop them below and I will try and answer them as best I can. As I said at the beginning of this video, I've only been in the industry for about 2 years now, so I'm still quite a baby in some ways, but hopefully I'll be able to answer some of your questions. Let's see. Christian, no, Honey is not going to give us some top tips. She is currently upstairs in her crate. Otherwise, she'd be running like a mad woman. And for those of you who don't know who Honey is, I have a sausage dog named Honey, and I absolutely had to drop that in there. So let's just see. Yes, another one. I've made some notes here. I'm not being crazy. So again, oven deep cleaning, something that if you're booking your own cleaners, that they will, you know, they will leave out. So let's talk a bit more about when you've moved out of your property and you're at the deposit stage. Now, some landlords will do it very old-fashioned if they're self-managing, a few texts back and forth, a few emails. agents, they will either be very tech-based and they'll have a platform for that. I know that some agents use a platform called the Depository, which, you know, streamlines all of that process, so that's very easy. Or again, some agencies will be sure to just email back and forth. Now, one really important thing here when it comes to your deposit stage is that everything that is proposed to be deducted needs to be signed off by the landlord and also needs to be agreed by you. So if you're one of those people where you need your deposit back because you can't get the cash from anywhere else for your next property, or however it is that it's working for you, be organised and be very proactive in terms of responding to emails and coming to some kind of agreement, or just, you know, interacting with your agent or your landlord so you can get that money back in your account as soon as possible. I mean, a very common thing that is seen is that people are like, great, when do I get my deposit back? So first of all, you need to, you know, look at if there's any deductions, you know, discussing how the deposit's going to be split if you're in a multiple person tenancy, you know, all of these different things. I think being on top of that and being proactive is something that's really gonna, you know, push this along. Question saying in the comments below, don't just leave tons of rubbish outside and leave unwanted items. Again, yep, good one. Closing bills, making sure that all of your utilities know that you're moving. Make sure they know where you're moving to. Again, forwarding addresses for your agents or your landlords, critical. The amount of post from experience that comes through, that's really important for like 5 years ago for a property that has been managed for 10 years. You know, if we don't have a forwarding address, we can't send that on to you, and that could be something that could be really important for you. So I can't see any questions coming through. I think I've pretty much sort of covered it. I mean, it's a stressful time, but, you know, it sort of just goes. I'm just trying to rack my brain to think of anything that I haven't already mentioned. Make sure that I'm not just blabbering verbal BS. Let's see. Oh, one thing to mention actually that I know from experience I've had a nightmare with, any of your Virgin Media kit. Not necessarily something that's going to benefit anyone but yourself. But if you've got like any kit from any of your internet providers, do make sure that you send that back and do not leave that in the property, because I think they can charge you up to £50 for that kit if you don't send it back. Or I think that if you're not able to send it back, you can actually return it to a Virgin Media shop or whichever shop that it is. So how long can I expect to have my deposit? So that really depends. I think the general rule of thumb, speaking off the top of my head because I don't deal with checkout so often, is within 10 days it's expected to be returned to you. Might be wrong there, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's within 10 working days. Now obviously this is very dependent on the points that I mentioned previously. So for example, you need to decide who's getting what share of the deposit if there's more than one person. You also need to consider things like, you know, are there any deductions from my deposit? Have I signed off on those? If you have signed off on those, what's the hold up? Most of the time, especially at the moment when agents are running a reduced service or landlords may be, you know, affected by the pandemic at the moment, there may be a slight delay on that, but generally speaking, 10 days. But you should really just be proactive. I mean, there's not a lot more that I can say than that. Just try and be really, you know, on the ball with any emails and going back and forth. And if you're in a multiple occupation tenancy, then get your flatmates in gear. Let's see, so yeah, as Anne said below, you have 14 days to advise the tenant of any deductions that you wish to make. So again, it all just depends whether your landlord is active, whether your agents can get hold of your landlord. It really just depends on the situation. at this moment in time, try and be a little bit more patient with agents and with landlords, because you just don't know what their circumstances are. I know a lot of agents in the industry are working really hard at the moment to make sure that they maintain those levels of service, albeit with furloughed staff, working from home, not having the best setup. So just try and be a little bit patient and just try and be as proactive as possible. What's Anne saying here? So all depends on how quickly tenants are liaising with the landlord or agent to come to an agreement before it is paid out. Yep, one of the most common reasons that your deposit is held up is because nothing has been officially agreed or put into writing. I would say that, you know, a really great thing to do would be try and meet in the middle if you can't come to an agreement. Again, if your agents use the depository, then they have what's called a Hail Mary on there, so you can use that. Let's see, and only after 28 days can a tenant start a dispute. So for those of you that aren't familiar, dispute is something that will happen after 28 days of trying to negotiate any deductions on your deposit that you feel is unfair. So for example, if you've lived in a property for 10 years and it's never been repainted, and the landlord tries to charge you for the whole property to be repainted from your deposit, then of course this isn't generally something people are going to be happy to do. Something very rare actually that we see. I mean, a lot of landlords, talking from experience, are a lot more lenient and are just ready to, you know, like, whatever, we'll just brush it off and sort the property out. Let's see, any other things coming through? Just trying to think if there's anything that I haven't covered. I don't know what time we're on now. Can't see the time. If anybody can let me know how long we've been running now, that would be great. Oh, I don't know how I see. What else can I think of? Anything that I have not covered? Freezer, bathroom, extraction fans in your bathroom, one to think about. Those often collect quite a lot of dust, so those sometimes good to give them a clean out, give them a hoover. A great way to see if you have cleaned it efficiently enough is to get a piece of, you know, kitchen or toilet paper, turn your extraction fan on, stick that against it. Same with your cooker hood. If that's sticking, then great, that's all working well. Just trying to think if there's anything else. Of course, dishwashers, washing machines, those need to be washed through. Maybe something that your cleaners will be willing to do if you're organising your own clean. But, you know, worth checking the filters on those to see if there's anything in there. I mean, really, it's just about giving the property a once over and making a list of things, you know, where you can have the peace of mind that those things have been done. I think that pretty much covers it. I don't know, any more questions before we finish up? Oh yeah, of course, empty the property of all perishables. We found some lovely penicillin farms in fridges that have been left unplugged with some lovely smelly cheese. Tried to avoid leaving anything that's going to be stinky. Oh yeah, of course, outside space. So, you know, if you've got a garden, again, this all comes down to checking your contract. Ideally, you will have read through your contract and know that back to front in terms of special clauses and maintenance when you first move in, so you can avoid this. But gardens, of course, if they're overgrown, you might want to think about getting a gardener in. I know that keeping the property in the same condition does include that your outside space is looking spick and span, or just how it was handed to you. You know, balconies, if that's been freshly repainted, might be worth giving them a brush. Let's see, so Carla said, are there any things tenants can do throughout their tenancy to minimise mould or damp marks that might turn into deductions later on? Okay, so I mean, in terms of damp marks, if you have damp marks, of course, that's more of a maintenance issue that needs to be investigated. So if your bathroom's next to your kitchen and some marks on the walls, that will need to be a maintenance issue. But in terms of mould, mould generally will tend to happen in places like your kitchen, around your windows, in your bathroom. Now, the black speckledy mould that you tend to see in these areas is just a reaction from steam or, you know, condensation settling on a cold surface, and this is what you see as a result. Now, I would say that at the moment, while we're all living in our properties and we're all at home, much more than we ever have been before, the average person, I think, produces about between 4 to 6 litres of moisture in the air per day. So that's, I believe, without cooking. So, you know, steam from your cooking, when you're showering, you know, you're showering every day, you might be having baths multiple times a day, you know, just living your best life. But this is all contributing to moisture in the air. Now, if you don't have the sufficient extraction fans on when this is going on, or opening your windows and allowing the air to flow, you will get some moisture that settles on surfaces and will end up in this mould. Now, quite a common thing we see is tenants going, "Oh my god, there's mould everywhere. This is outrageous. This is crazy." Don't panic. It is just the moisture is settling on a cold surface. Doesn't tend to be detrimental to your health. Can be easily cleaned with some mould and mildew remover. I know Sillet Bang do a really great one. Just spray that on the affected area. Do be careful because it does have bleach in it, and you wipe that away. You might want to do that once a week just to make sure that all the spores there are killed, and from there on you want to try and ventilate your property as much as possible. So when you get out of the shower, leave your windows open for half an hour just to let all of that moist air exit the property. Otherwise you're going to end up with condensation mould. Or likewise, if you have a lot of furniture in your property, you can also get this behind wardrobes, bookshelves, things like that. Around your windows, again, this can sometimes happen in the kitchen area from where you're cooking. Things that you can do to avoid that is just cooking with, you know, your lids on your saucepans, again, ventilating the property, and again, mould and mildew remover will remove all of that. I know that obviously some properties, depending on the build of them, so for example, if you're in a listed building, might not be so great in terms of air ventilation, but of course you can just minimise the impact of condensation mould and what this has on you by making sure that you're airing out your property every day. So let's see. So hopefully that pretty much covers that. Can a tenant request copies of check-in reports and inspections at any time? Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, if you're in a property that's managed by the landlord, and they're sort of a do-it-yourself landlord, they may not always have copies of an inspection report per se. I know my landlady here, I've been here nearly a year, she doesn't tend to do them, but I do have my check-in inventory, and if you don't have yours, then there's no reason to say that you shouldn't be allowed that. I think that you should be handed a copy of that at your move-in. I believe that's one of the requirements of granting a tenancy, because of course you need a schedule of condition or your check-in inventory to see what state your property was in. So yes, the answer to that is that you can have copies of your check-in reports or inspection reports at any time. I know if you're a tech-based agency, those are usually accessible to you on the internet. If you can hear any crying upstairs, I don't have a hostage, it's my dog, so please try to ignore that. And yeah, like Anne said, window cleaning if safe to do so. Might be worth checking in with your landlord or agency. Sometimes that is covered in service charges. But again, from the inside, you might want to double check with your cleaners to do that. If you live in a house, again, might be a requirement of your contract to have your windows cleaned. So do just double check those things. I think that's pretty much it. Oh, yeah, right. We've come to the end of the live session. So let's see. So as Anne said, correct, if no inventory or check-in report is present, no deductions can be made at the end of your tenancy as no proof is on hand. So there we are, peeps. That is rounding up sort of check-out maintenance, maintenance in general, and how to make sure that that process is smooth. Just going to reiterate the points that, you know, you've got use of your contract, your inventory report when you checked in, and also any inspection reports. So do utilise those. If in doubt, reach out to your landlord, reach out to your agent. Communication is key, especially in these times. So just make sure that you're upfront, honest, about whatever it is that you might be worrying about, and I'm sure that your agent or your landlord can help you come to a conclusion before it gets to deposit deductions. So that's me over and out, guys. Thank you very much for everyone who was watching. Just want to say a huge thanks to Deb and to Carla who set this up, and I also know Mal is working behind the scenes on this, so thank you guys so much for your hard work doing all of this movement here. And that's all really. Stay safe, stay positive, and if you haven't watched Tiger King, do so. You won't regret it. Bye now.